Priest stops billionaire's wedding with black bride when he noticed something strange with the groom's phone. In the pristine silence of St. Catherine's Cathedral, where crystal chandeliers cast rainbows on marble floors, a single notification would shatter two hearts and expose the ugly truth about judgment disguised as righteousness. Before we get deep into the story, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit subscribe if you're hooked in and ready to enjoy this story, because tomorrow I have another beautiful story to share with you, and I don't want you to miss it for anything. Now, let's get into the story. The morning sun painted St. Catherine's Cathedral in shades of gold and amber, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like prayers made manifest. Inside, the air hummed with anticipation and the soft rustle of silk and satin as the most talked-about wedding of the year prepared to unfold. Ezekiel Willis stood before the ornate mirror in the groom's suite, his reflection showing a man who had everything except the woman who would soon become his wife. At 34, he had built a tech empire worth billions, but none of his achievements compared to the joy radiating from his dark eyes today. His hands, usually steady as they commanded boardrooms and signed million-dollar deals, trembled slightly as he adjusted his platinum cufflinks. "Easy there, brother," chuckled his best man, David, slapping him on the shoulder. "You'd think you were nervous or something." Ezekiel's laugh was warm and genuine. "Nervous? I've been waiting my whole life for this moment. She's everything I never knew I needed." 3 floors above, in the bridal suite that overlooked the cathedral's rose gardens, Cherry Matthews, soon to be Cherry Willis, stood like a vision in ivory and lace. Her wedding dress, a masterpiece of French couture, hugged her curves perfectly, the intricate beadwork catching the morning light like scattered stars. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo, adorned with pearls that had belonged to her grandmother, a woman who had cleaned houses so her granddaughter could dream bigger dreams. "Baby girl, you look absolutely radiant," whispered her mother, Diane, tears threatening to ruin her carefully applied makeup. "Your grandmother would be so proud." Cherry's reflection in the antique mirror showed a woman transformed by love. At 29, she had built her own successful interior design firm. But today wasn't about business or achievements. Today was about the man who had seen her soul and chosen to love every part of it. "I can't believe this is really happening, Mama," Cherry whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes I think I'm going to wake up and it'll all be a dream." "Oh, honey, this is as real as it gets," laughed her maid of honor, Jessica, adjusting Cherry's veil with practiced precision. "And that man downstairs, he's been pacing the church since 6 in the morning. Pastor Williams had to threaten to lock him out if he didn't stop wearing a hole in the marble." The mention of Pastor Williams sent a small chill through the room that none of the women could quite name. The elderly priest had been reluctant to perform the ceremony, citing scheduling conflicts and traditional concerns before finally agreeing under pressure from the church's board of directors. Ezekiel's substantial donation to the cathedral's restoration fund had certainly swayed the decision. In the cathedral's main sanctuary, guests filled pews lined with white roses and baby's breath. The Willis family occupied the right side, a sea of tailored suits and designer gowns, their faces showing polite interest rather than genuine joy. Ezekiel's parents, Robert and Margaret Willis, sat in the front row, their expressions carefully neutral as they watched their son's choice unfold. "I still don't understand why he couldn't have found someone more suitable," murmured Margaret to her husband, her voice barely audible above the gentle notes of the string quartet. Robert's jaw tightened. "He's happy, Margaret. That should be enough." "But the family reputation will survive," Robert cut her off firmly. "Our son is marrying the woman he loves. End of discussion." On the left side of the aisle, Cherry's family and friends created a stark contrast. Their joy was infectious. Their love for the bride was evident in every smile and whispered blessing. Her father, Jerome, a retired mechanic whose hands bore the honest calluses of a lifetime of hard work, kept dabbing at his eyes with a handkerchief. my baby girl, marrying a billionaire, but more importantly, marrying a good man. Pastor Williams stood at the altar, his weathered hands gripping his Bible with white knuckles. At 73, he had performed hundreds of weddings, but this one sat differently in his stomach. He had watched Ezekiel Willis grow up in this very church, had baptized him in the marble font that now held holy water, blessed by 3 generations of pastors. But this union, it challenged everything he thought he knew about tradition, about propriety, about the natural order of things. What will people think? The thought plagued him as he watched the mixed congregation settle into their seats. What will the church board say when this is splashed across every society page in the country? The string quartet's melody swelled, and Pastor Williams felt his chest tighten. He had prayed about this moment, had sought guidance from Scripture and from his own conscience. But the answers that came back to him were complicated, filtered through decades of subtle prejudices he had never acknowledged, never examined. As the processional music began, Pastor Williams caught sight of Ezekiel's phone buzzing incessantly in his jacket pocket. The young man's face was flush with happiness, but something about the way he kept glancing at the device made the pastor's unease grow. Strange behavior for a groom on his wedding day. What kind of man is distracted by his phone on his wedding day? What kind of messages could be so urgent?
As Cherry reached the altar, her father lifted her veil and kissed her forehead. "Be happy, baby girl," he whispered. "You deserve all the love in the world." Jerome placed his daughter's hand in Ezekiel's, and the young billionaire felt complete for the first time in his life. But even as he squeezed Cherry's fingers, his phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. Pastor Williams cleared his throat, his voice carrying across the cathedral with practiced authority. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Ezekiel Robert Willis and Cherry Diane Matthews in holy matrimony." The familiar words began to flow, but Pastor Williams found himself studying the groom's face, watching for signs of whatever was troubling him. The phone continued its insistent buzzing, and with each notification, the pastor's suspicions grew darker. What kind of man brings his business to the altar, he wondered. What kind of messages could be so important that they would interrupt this sacred moment? As the ceremony progressed, Pastor Williams made a decision that would change everything. He would not allow this union to proceed until he understood what was happening. The sanctity of marriage, the reputation of his church, the very foundations of tradition itself seemed to hang in the balance. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only the bonds between two people in love, but the very nature of judgment, prejudice, and the courage to love despite the world's disapproval. What do you think is really happening with Ezekiel's phone? Are Pastor Williams' suspicions justified, or is there something deeper at play? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Sometimes the truth is more heartbreaking than we imagine. The cathedral's acoustics carried Pastor Williams' voice like a divine instrument, each word of the traditional ceremony echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Cherry's hands trembled in Ezekiel's as they exchanged the vows they had written together, promises that spoke of forever and always, of love that would transcend any obstacle. "I promise to stand by you through every storm," Ezekiel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "To love you not just for who you are today, but for who you're becoming. You are my heart, Cherry, my everything." Tears sparkled in Cherry's eyes as she responded, "I promise to be your safe harbor, your strongest supporter, your greatest love. Together, we can face anything this world throws at us." The congregation leaned forward, caught up in the intimacy of the moment. Even Margaret Willis found herself dabbing at her eyes, moved despite her reservations. This was love in its purest form, raw and honest and beautiful. But Pastor Williams' attention was split. Even as he guided the couple through their vows, his eyes kept drifting to Ezekiel's jacket pocket, where the phone continued its insistent buzzing. Each vibration seemed to pierce through the sacred atmosphere like a discordant note in a symphony. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Whatever was happening, it was urgent, persistent, and completely inappropriate for a wedding ceremony. Pastor Williams felt his jaw clench as he watched Ezekiel's face tighten with each notification. "The phone," Pastor Williams announced, his voice slightly strained. David stepped forward with the platinum bands, each one inscribed with the couple's initials and wedding date. As Ezekiel reached for Cherry's ring, his phone buzzed again, this time so violently that it was audible to the front rows. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Margaret Willis raised an eyebrow. Jerome Matthews frowned, concerned for his daughter's special moment. Pastor Williams felt something dark and suspicious bloom in his chest. What kind of emergency could be so urgent that it couldn't wait? What kind of business deal? What kind of other woman? The thought struck him like lightning. Another woman. That's what this is. A man with his kind of money, his kind of lifestyle, and marrying a girl from the wrong side of town? This is exactly what I was afraid of. "Ezekiel," Pastor Williams said, his voice carrying a new edge, "perhaps you should address whatever is demanding your attention." The cathedral fell silent except for the distant city sounds filtering through the stained glass windows. Cherry looked up at her fiancé, confusion clouding her features. "Ez, what's wrong?" Ezekiel's face had gone pale, but he shook his head. "It's nothing, baby. Nothing that can't wait. This is our moment." But his phone buzzed again, and this time the sound seemed to echo through the entire cathedral like a death knell. Pastor Williams felt his suspicions crystallize into certainty. Here was a man who couldn't even put his phone away for his own wedding ceremony. Here was a man who was clearly hiding something. And here was this beautiful, innocent girl about to bind herself to someone who was already showing his true colors. "I won't let this happen," he decided. "I won't perform a ceremony for a man who's already betraying his vows before he's even made them." "Stop," Pastor Williams said, his voice cutting through the cathedral like a blade. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. Cherry's breath caught in her throat. Ezekiel's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. "Stop?" Cherry whispered, her voice barely audible. "What do you mean, stop?" Pastor Williams closed his Bible with a sharp snap that echoed through the cathedral. His face was stern, righteous, the face of a man who believed he was doing God's work. "I cannot, in good conscience, continue this ceremony, not when the groom is clearly distracted by matters more pressing than his sacred vows." The congregation erupted in whispers, heads turning, voices rising in confusion and shock. Margaret Willis gripped her husband's arm. Jerome Matthews started to rise from his seat, his face a mask of protective fury. "Pastor Williams, Ezekiel," said, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. "I don't understand. What are you talking about?" "Your phone," Pastor Williams said, his voice dripping with disapproval. "It has been buzzing incessantly throughout this sacred ceremony. Whatever business dealings or other commitments you have that are so urgent that they cannot wait for your own wedding ceremony, perhaps you should reconsider whether you're ready for the commitment of marriage." The words hit like physical blows. Cherry staggered backward, her bouquet dropping from nerveless fingers. The white roses scattered across the marble floor like fallen snow. "Other woman?" Cherry's voice was barely audible, but in the cathedral's acoustics, everyone heard it. "Ezekiel, what is he talking about?" Ezekiel's face cycled through confusion, hurt, and dawning horror as he realized what the pastor was implying. "Cherry, no! Baby, no! It's not what he thinks. It's not what anyone thinks." But Pastor Williams was not finished. Years of suppressed prejudice, of inconformity with change, of fear disguised as righteousness, poured out of him like poison from a wound. "I have witnessed many weddings in my time," he continued, his voice gaining strength from what he perceived as moral authority. I have seen men who were not ready for marriage, men who were not worthy of the women they sought to wed. A man who cannot put aside his worldly concerns for the duration of his own wedding ceremony is not a man ready for the sacred bonds of matrimony."
The implication hung in the air like smoke. Cherry's family understood it. The Willis family understood it. The society photographers, already snapping pictures, understood it. This was not just about a phone call. This was about a wealthy white man and a black woman from a different world, and the assumption that money and power meant infidelity and disrespect. "You're wrong," Ezekiel said, his voice gaining strength. "You're completely wrong. Cherry, baby, look at me." But Cherry was staring at Pastor Williams, her mind reeling. Are you saying that Ezekiel that he's been unfaithful?" "I'm saying," Pastor Williams replied, his voice carrying the weight of presumed moral authority, "that a man who cannot honor the sanctity of his own wedding ceremony with his full attention is not a man ready to honor the vows of marriage." The cathedral erupted in chaos. Jerome Matthews was on his feet, his face thunderous with rage. "How dare you?" he shouted, his voice carrying across the cathedral. "How dare you accuse my daughter's fiancé without proof, without cause?" Margaret Willis, perhaps sensing the racial undertones of the pastor's accusations, rose as well. "Pastor Williams, this is highly irregular. If you have specific concerns—" "My concerns," Pastor Williams interrupted, his voice rising above the din, "are for the sanctity of this institution and the young woman who deserves better than a man who cannot even focus on his own wedding vows." Cherry stood frozen at the altar, her wedding dress suddenly feeling like a costume, her dreams crumbling around her like ancient parchment. The man she loved, the man she had chosen to spend her life with, was being accused of infidelity in front of everyone who mattered to her. "Cherry," Ezekiel said, reaching for her, but she pulled away. "Don't," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Just don't." The rejection hit Ezekiel like a physical blow. He stood there, in his wedding tuxedo, surrounded by flowers and witnesses, watching the love of his life pull away from him based on the assumptions of a bitter old man. "You want to know what's on my phone?" Ezekiel said, his voice rising with desperate anger. "You want to know what's so important that it's been buzzing all morning?" Pastor Williams straightened, vindicated. "By all means, enlighten us." Ezekiel's hand moved toward his pocket, but then he stopped. His face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like a broken child. "I can't," he whispered. "I can't do this. Not here. Not like this." The admission sent a shockwave through the cathedral. To many, it sounded like guilt, like a confession of wrongdoing. Cherry's sob echoed through the sacred space, a sound of pure heartbreak that seemed to pierce every heart present. "Cherry," Ezekiel begged, tears streaming down his face, "please don't listen to him. Please don't let him destroy us." But the damage was done. The seed of doubt had been planted, watered by years of societal prejudice and assumptions about wealth and power and race. Cherry looked at the man she loved, and for the first time, she saw him through the lens of other people's suspicions. I need air," she said, lifting her skirts and rushing toward the side exit of the cathedral. "Cherry!" Ezekiel called after her, but she was gone, leaving behind only the scattered petals of her bouquet and the broken dreams of a perfect wedding day. The cathedral became a battlefield of whispered accusations and defending voices. The Willis family huddled together, their faces a mix of embarrassment and outrage. The Matthews family surrounded Jerome, their protective instincts in full force. "This is a travesty," Robert Willis said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Pastor Williams, your behavior is completely unacceptable." "I am protecting that young woman," Pastor Williams replied, his conviction unwavering. "Someone has to speak for her when she cannot speak for herself." "She doesn't need your protection," Jerome Matthews shot back, his fists clenched. "How dare you?" "How dare I?" David's voice rose. "How dare you destroy two people's happiness based on your own prejudices? How dare you stand in a house of God and spread poison instead of love?" Meanwhile, Jessica and the other bridesmaids had rushed after Cherry, finding her in the cathedral's rose garden, her wedding dress trailing in the dirt as she sat on a stone bench sobbing. Honey, Jessica said gently, sitting beside her. You know Ezekiel. You know the kind of man he is. Don't let that bitter old man destroy what you have. But what if he's right? Cherry whispered, her voice broken. What if I've been fooling myself? What if a man like Ezekiel could never really love someone like me? Someone like you? Jessica's voice was fierce. You mean someone brilliant, beautiful, successful, and amazing? Cherry, you're talking crazy. I'm talking reality. I'm talking about the fact that we come from different worlds, and maybe those worlds just don't mix. Back in the cathedral, Ezekiel stood alone at the altar, his phone still buzzing in his pocket. Every vibration felt like another nail in the coffin of his happiness. He looked at the scattered congregation, at the faces filled with curiosity and judgment, at the man who had just destroyed his life based on assumptions and prejudice. You want to know what's on my phone? He said again, his voice carrying across the cathedral. You want to know what's so important that it's been buzzing all morning? Pastor Williams lifted his chin, ready for vindication. Yes. Ezekiel's hand moved toward his pocket, but then he stopped. His face crumpled with grief that had nothing to do with the wedding and everything to do with the news he had been receiving all morning. I can't, he whispered again. I can't share this. Not like this. Not as some kind of defense or justification. Some things are too sacred, too private, too painful. To the congregation, it sounded like guilt. To Pastor Williams, it sounded like confirmation of his worst suspicions. But to those who knew Ezekiel well, it sounded like the voice of a man carrying a burden too heavy for public consumption. The cathedral fell silent except for the distant sound of Cherry's sobs carried on the wind from the rose garden. The most beautiful wedding of the year had become its most tragic, and the ripple effects would be felt for years to come. As the congregation began to disperse, whispering among themselves, Ezekiel remained at the altar, alone with his grief and his secrets, watching his dreams disappear like smoke in the wind.
The cathedral's rose garden had become a sanctuary of sorrow. Cherry sat on the weathered stone bench, her wedding dress now stained with dirt and tears, her carefully arranged hair falling in loose tendrils around her face. The white roses that had been meant to celebrate her joy now seemed to mock her pain, their pristine petals a stark contrast to the chaos in her heart. Jessica knelt beside her, her burgundy bridesmaid dress pooling in the garden dirt. Cherry, honey, you need to listen to me. You know Ezekiel. You know his heart. Don't let that man's prejudice destroy what you have. Do I know him? Cherry whispered, her voice raw from crying. I thought I did. I thought I knew everything about him. But what if I've been living in a fairy tale? What if I've been so caught up in the idea of love conquering all that I've been blind to the truth? Her mother, Diane, approached carefully, her own eyes red with unshed tears. Baby girl, I've watched that man with you for 2 years. I've seen how he looks at you, how he talks about you when you're not around. That's not the behavior of a man who's being unfaithful. But the phone, Mama, Cherry said, her voice breaking. It kept buzzing, and he wouldn't tell us what it was about. What could be so important that it couldn't wait for our wedding? What could be so secret that he can't share it? Inside the cathedral, the scene was equally devastating. The guests had mostly dispersed, leaving behind a handful of close family members and friends. The flowers remained beautiful and untouched, a monument to dreams that had been shattered in a matter of minutes. Ezekiel sat in the front pew, his head in his hands, his phone finally silent in his pocket. The buzzing had stopped, but the damage was done. David sat beside him, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "This is insane," David said, his voice tight with anger. 20 years I've known you, and I've never seen you look at another woman the way you look at Cherry. Pastor Williams is a bitter old man who can't stand the thought of change. "It doesn't matter what I feel," Ezekiel said, his voice muffled by his hands. It doesn't matter what the truth is. Cherry believes him. She pulled away from me, David. She looked at me like I was a stranger. Because she's hurt and confused, because that man filled her head with poison. But Cherry loves you, Ez. She loves you enough to fight for you if you give her the truth. Ezekiel lifted his head, and David was shocked by the depth of pain in his friend's eyes. The truth? The truth is more complicated than anyone in this room could handle. The truth is... He stopped, his voice catching. The truth is that I've been carrying something so heavy, so devastating, that I didn't want to burden anyone with it. Especially not Cherry. Not on what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. Robert Willis approached his son, his face etched with concern and guilt. "Son, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that man's prejudice has ruined your wedding day. But you need to fight for Cherry. You need to tell her the truth about what's been happening." "The truth?" Ezekiel laughed bitterly. "The truth is that sometimes loving someone means protecting them from the worst parts of your world. The truth is that I've been trying to shield her from something that would break her heart." Margaret Willis, who had been standing quietly nearby, finally spoke. "Ezekiel, whatever is happening, whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to face it alone. And you certainly don't have to face it without Cherry." While the families grappled with the immediate fallout, Jessica had taken it upon herself to uncover the truth. She had known Ezekiel as long as Cherry had, and everything about Pastor Williams' accusations felt wrong, felt poisoned by assumptions and prejudice. She found Pastor Williams in his office, still in his ceremonial robes, sitting behind his desk with a satisfied expression that made her stomach turn. "I hope you're proud of yourself," she said, closing the door behind her with more force than necessary. "I've done what I believed was right," Pastor Williams replied, his voice calm and certain. "I've protected a young woman from making a mistake that would have haunted her for the rest of her life. You've destroyed two people's happiness based on your own prejudices. You've been uncomfortable with this wedding from the beginning because you can't stand the thought of a successful black woman marrying a wealthy white man. That's exactly what this is. You saw an opportunity to sabotage their relationship and you took it. A phone call, Pastor Williams? That's your evidence of infidelity? Do you have any idea how many reasons a phone could be buzzing on someone's wedding day?" Pastor Williams' certainty wavered slightly. The man couldn't even focus on his own wedding vows. What kind of commitment is that? The kind that comes from a man who's dealing with something private and painful. The kind that comes from someone who's trying to protect the woman he loves from whatever burden he's carrying. As Jessica confronted the pastor, David was conducting his own investigation. He had known Ezekiel since college, had been his roommate, his business partner, his closest friend. He knew his patterns, his tells, his secrets, and he knew that whatever was happening with that phone had nothing to do with infidelity. He found Ezekiel in the cathedral's meditation chapel, a small alcove lit by candles and stained glass. His face was etched with a grief that went deeper than a ruined wedding day. "Talk to me," David said simply. Ezekiel looked up, and David saw tears tracking down his cheeks. "Do you remember my sister Emma?" David's blood ran cold. Emma Willis, Ezekiel's younger sister who had been battling cancer for the past year, the sister who had been undergoing experimental treatment in Switzerland, who had been too sick to travel for the wedding. "Ez," David whispered. "No." "The doctors have been calling all morning," Ezekiel said, his voice breaking. "Emma, she's dying, David. She's been fighting so hard. But her body it's giving up. The treatments aren't working anymore. David felt the world tilt around him. How long? Hours. Maybe less. Ezekiel's voice was barely a whisper. She's been asking for me. She wants to say goodbye. But I couldn't leave Cherry. I couldn't ruin her perfect day with my family's tragedy. Jesus, Ez, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell Cherry? Because today was supposed to be about love and hope and new beginnings. Emma made me promise not to tell anyone until after the wedding. She said she didn't want to be the reason Cherry's wedding day was sad. She said she wanted to give us this gift of one perfect day before.
The weight of the truth hit David like a physical blow. While Pastor Williams had been spinning tales of infidelity and betrayal, Ezekiel had been carrying the unbearable knowledge that his sister was dying. While the congregation had been whispering about secret affairs and hidden commitments, a young man had been torn between his love for his bride and his love for his dying sister. "You have to tell Cherry," David said firmly. "You have to tell her the truth." "How can I?" Ezekiel asked, his voice breaking. "How can I dump this on her now? How can I turn what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life into the saddest?" "Emma's dying, David. My baby sister is dying, and I can't even be there with her because I'm here trying to explain to everyone that I'm not the monster they think I am." Back in the rose garden, Cherry was beginning to piece together fragments of truth. Jessica had returned from her confrontation with Pastor Williams, her face flushed with anger and determination. "That man is a bigot," she announced without preamble. "He's been looking for an excuse to sabotage your wedding since the day it was announced." "But the phone," Cherry began. "Could be anything," Jessica interrupted. "Could be a family emergency, a business crisis, a sick relative. Could be literally anything except what that poisonous old man suggested." Cherry's mother nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about it too, baby. In all the time you've been with Ezekiel, has he ever given you reason to doubt his faithfulness? Has he ever been secretive about his phone, his schedule, his whereabouts?" "No," Cherry admitted reluctantly. "He's always been completely open with me about everything." "Then what's different about today?" Diana asked gently. "What would make him suddenly secretive about a phone call on his wedding day?" Cherry's mind began to work through the possibilities. She thought about Ezekiel's behavior over the past few weeks, the way he had seemed distracted sometimes, worried about something he wouldn't share. She had attributed it to wedding stress, to the pressure of combining their two very different worlds. "There's something else," Jessica said carefully. "When I was arguing with Pastor Williams, he said something about Ezekiel not being able to focus on his vows. But Cherry, I was watching him during the ceremony. He wasn't distracted by his phone. He was fighting to ignore it. Every time it buzzed, he looked more pained, more conflicted. That's not the behavior of a man eager to take a call from his mistress. That's the behavior of a man torn between two important things." Cherry felt a crack in the wall of doubt that had been building around her heart. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe, just maybe, Ezekiel has been trying to protect you from something painful. Maybe he's been trying to shield you from some crisis or tragedy that he didn't want to interfere with your wedding day." As if summoned by their conversation, David appeared at the garden gate, his face grave with purpose. "Cherry, I need to talk to you." "David, I can't." "Yes, you can and you will, because the man you love is falling apart, and the truth is more heartbreaking than any lie Pastor Williams could have invented." Cherry looked at her best friend, at her mother, at the faces of the people who loved her most. Slowly, she nodded. "Tell me." David took a deep breath, knowing that what he was about to reveal would change everything. "It's about Emma, Ezekiel's sister. She's dying, Cherry. She's been dying all morning, and the doctors have been calling to tell him that she doesn't have much time left. The words hit Cherry like a physical blow. Emma. Sweet, funny Emma, who had been too sick to be a bridesmaid, but had insisted on video calling Cherry the night before to wish her luck. Emma, who had been fighting cancer for months, who had been undergoing experimental treatment in Switzerland. "No," Cherry whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "No, that can't be right. She was getting better. The treatments were working." "They stopped working," David said gently. "And she made Ezekiel promise not to tell anyone until after the wedding. She didn't want to ruin your perfect day with her tragedy." Cherry felt the world shift around her, felt all her assumptions crumble like sand. While she had been walking down the aisle in her perfect dress, Emma had been dying in a hospital bed thousands of miles away. While she had been exchanging vows, Ezekiel had been carrying the unbearable weight of knowing his sister was slipping away. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Oh my God, what have I done?" "You believed a lie," David said firmly. "You believed a lie told by a man who couldn't stand the thought of your happiness. But it's not too late, Cherry. It's not too late to fight for the truth." Cherry was already moving, lifting her stained wedding dress, running toward the cathedral. Behind her, Jessica and her mother followed, their hearts breaking for the pain that could have been avoided, the love that had been poisoned by prejudice and assumption. The truth was finally emerging, but the question remained: would it be enough to heal the wounds that had been inflicted, or had too much damage already been done? The truth about Ezekiel's phone is finally coming to light, and it's more heartbreaking than anyone imagined. How do you think Cherry will react when she learns the full truth? Can love overcome the damage done by prejudice and misunderstanding? Share your thoughts below. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are born from the deepest pain. Cherry burst through the cathedral doors, her wedding dress billowing behind her like the wings of a fallen angel. The sacred space, which had been filled with whispered gossip and broken dreams just moments ago, now felt heavy with the weight of truth finally coming to light. Ezekiel was still in the meditation chapel, David beside him, both men's faces etched with the kind of grief that comes from watching someone you love slip away. When Ezekiel heard the click of Cherry's heels on the marble floor, he looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. "Cherry," he whispered, his voice breaking on her name. She stood in the doorway, her chest heaving from running, her carefully applied makeup streaked with tears. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the space that had been created by lies and assumptions, by prejudice disguised as righteousness. "Emma," Cherry said, the single word carrying the weight of everything she now understood. Ezekiel's face crumpled. "I'm so sorry, baby. I'm so sorry I couldn't tell you. I'm so sorry I let that man make you think—" No, don't apologize. Don't you dare apologize for trying to protect me, for trying to give me the perfect wedding day, even while your heart was breaking.
She fell to her knees beside his chair, taking his hands in hers. His phone was clutched in his palm, the screen dark, but somehow still ominous with its burden of terrible news. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctors said, maybe hours, maybe less. Ezekiel's voice broke completely. "She's been asking for me, Cherry. She wants to say goodbye. But I couldn't leave you. I couldn't ruin our day with—" "Our day?" Cherry's voice was fierce with love and pain. "Ezekiel, your sister is dying. Your sister who called me last night to tell me how happy she was that you found someone who loves you the way you deserve to be loved. And you've been carrying this alone because you were trying to protect me?" "She made me promise," Ezekiel said, tears streaming down his face. "She made me promise not to tell anyone until after the wedding. She said she didn't want to be the reason our perfect day was sad. She said she wanted to give us this gift of one perfect day before—" Cherry felt her heart break and heal simultaneously.
This was the man she had fallen in love with, the man who would carry unbearable pain rather than burden others with it. This was the man who had been accused of infidelity while he was actually dying inside from the thought of losing his sister. "Show me," she said firmly. "What?" "Show me the messages. Let me see what you've been dealing with." With trembling hands, Ezekiel unlocked his phone. The screen was filled with notifications from Swiss phone numbers, from doctors, from the private care facility where Emma was spending her final days. Message after message, each one more urgent than the last. "Mr. Willis, please call immediately. Emma's condition has deteriorated rapidly." "Sir, your sister is asking for you. Her vitals are becoming unstable." "Mr. Willis, we need to discuss Emma's comfort care options. Please respond as soon as possible." "Emma wants to video call with you and Cherry. She says it's important." Cherry's hands shook as she read the messages, each one a knife to her heart. While she had been walking down the aisle, while she had been exchanging vows, while she had been doubting the man she loved, Emma had been fighting for her life and asking for them both. "The last message," Cherry whispered. "She wants to video call with both of us." Ezekiel nodded, his face pale. I think she wants to say goodbye. To both of us." "Then we call her," Cherry said firmly. "Right now. We call her right now." David quietly slipped out of the meditation chapel, giving them privacy for what he knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of their lives. The space was small and intimate, lit by candles and the soft glow of stained glass windows depicting scenes of hope and redemption. Ezekiel's hands shook as he dialed the international number. The phone rang once, twice, and then Emma's face appeared on the screen. Pale and thin, but still beautiful, still radiating the warmth and humor that had made her beloved by everyone who knew her. "There's my big brother," she said, her voice weak but filled with love. "And there's my future sister-in-law. Oh, Cherry, you look so beautiful. Even with your makeup all smudged, you're gorgeous." Cherry laughed through her tears. "Emma, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," Emma said with a wry smile that was so much like her brother's. "But I'm okay. I'm ready. I just needed to see you both together on your wedding day." "Emma," Ezekiel said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm so sorry. I should be there with you. I should be holding your hand. You should be marrying the woman you love. That's exactly where you should be. I made you promise not to tell anyone because I wanted you to have one perfect day. One day where you could be completely happy without thinking about cancer or hospitals or any of the sadness that's been following our family around." "But the ceremony," Cherry said, "there was a problem. The pastor, he misunderstood about the phone calls and he stopped the wedding. He thought what?" Emma's voice gained strength, the fighter in her coming to the surface. Ezekiel and Cherry exchanged a look. How could they tell this dying woman that her brother had been accused of infidelity on his wedding day? How could they add that burden to her already overwhelming pain? "He thought Ezekiel wasn't committed to the marriage," Cherry said carefully. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Cherry, my brother has been talking about you non-stop for 2 years. He's been planning this wedding like it was a military operation. He's been more excited about marrying you than he was about his first billion-dollar deal." "Emma, we can talk about this later. Let's just—" "No," Emma interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "We can't talk about this later because I might not have a later. Cherry, look at me. Look at my brother. Do you see a man who's been unfaithful? Do you see a man who's not completely devoted to you?" Cherry looked at Ezekiel, really looked at him. She saw the man who had been carrying unbearable pain to protect her happiness. She saw the man who had been torn between his love for his sister and his love for his bride. She saw the man who had been accused of infidelity while he was actually dying inside from the thought of losing his sister. "I see the man I want to spend my life with," Cherry said firmly. "I see the man who was trying to protect me from heartbreak even while his own heart was breaking." "Good," Emma said, her voice beginning to fade. "Because I need you to promise me something. Both of you." "Anything," they said in unison. "Promise me you'll get married today.
Promise me you'll finish what you started. Promise me that despite everything that's happened, you'll still choose love." Before either of them could respond to Emma's request, the meditation chapel door burst open. Pastor Williams stood there, his face flush with righteous indignation, Jessica and David behind him trying to hold him back. "I'm sorry," Jessica said breathlessly. "He insisted on speaking with you." "Mr. Willis," Pastor Williams said, his voice stern and uncompromising, "I understand you're upset about the interruption of your ceremony, but I stand by my decision. A man who cannot put aside his worldly concerns for his own wedding is not—" "Stop!" Emma's voice came from the phone screen, weak but commanding. "Stop right there!" Pastor Williams looked down at the phone in shock, taking in the pale, obviously ill young woman on the screen. "You must be the pastor," Emma continued, her voice gaining strength from anger. "You must be the man who accused my brother of infidelity on his wedding day." "I never used that word. I simply suggested that a man who cannot focus on his vows—" "Cannot focus on his vows?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "Pastor, my brother has been getting phone calls all morning from doctors in Switzerland telling me that I'm dying. He's been torn between staying for his wedding and flying across the ocean to say goodbye to his sister. And instead of showing compassion, instead of trying to understand, you assumed the worst about him."
Pastor Williams' face went pale. I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask," Emma said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You didn't know because you made assumptions. You saw a wealthy white man marrying a beautiful black woman, and you assumed there had to be something wrong with it. You assumed he couldn't possibly be faithful to her, couldn't possibly love her the way she deserves to be loved." That's exactly what this is," Emma interrupted. "This is prejudice, plain and simple. This is you being unable to accept that love doesn't see color, doesn't see bank accounts, doesn't see social status. This is you being unable to accept that my brother found a woman who loves him for who he is, not what he has." Cherry felt tears streaming down her face as she watched this dying woman defend her brother's honor, defend their love from a hospital bed thousands of miles away. "Emma," she said softly, "you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," Emma said firmly, "because I'm dying and I don't have time for politeness or social niceties. Pastor Williams, you nearly destroyed the most beautiful love story I've ever witnessed because you couldn't see past your own prejudices. You nearly broke the hearts of two people who deserve nothing but happiness." Pastor Williams stood there, his face cycling through shame, anger, and dawning realization. For the first time, he was seeing the full picture, understanding the depth of his mistake. I thought," he began, but Emma wasn't finished. "You thought what? That a man with money couldn't possibly love a woman without it? That a white man couldn't possibly be faithful to a black woman? That there had to be some ulterior motive, some hidden agenda? I thought I was protecting—" "You thought you were protecting her from him," Emma said, her voice now barely above a whisper, but still carrying tremendous power. "But what you were really doing was protecting your own narrow view of the world from the reality that love is bigger than your prejudices." The chapel fell silent except for the sound of Emma's labored breathing coming through the phone speaker. Cherry looked at Ezekiel, saw the pain and pride in his eyes as he watched his sister fight for their love even as she fought for her life. "Pastor Williams," Cherry said quietly, "I think you should go." The old man looked around the chapel, at the faces filled with disappointment and anger, at the phone screen where a dying woman had just delivered the most devastating sermon of his career. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing through the cathedral like a funeral march. After Pastor Williams left, the chapel fell into a different kind of silence. Emma's breathing was becoming more labored, and her face was growing paler by the minute. The reality of her condition was undeniable, urgent, heartbreaking. "Emma," Ezekiel said, his voice gentle, "we need to get you some rest. We need to let the doctors—" "No!"
Emma said firmly. "Not yet. I need to know. Are you going to finish getting married today, or are you going to let that bitter old man win?" Cherry and Ezekiel looked at each other, the weight of the decision pressing down on them like a physical force. On one hand, there was Emma, dying in a hospital bed, wanting nothing more than to see her brother married to the woman he loved. On the other hand, there was the impossibility of celebrating while death waited in the wings. "How can we celebrate when you're—" Emma cut her off. "Because that's what love does," Emma said, her voice growing weaker but no less determined. "Love celebrates in the face of death. Love chooses joy even when the world is falling apart. Love says yes to happiness even when everything else is saying no." "But the guests," Ezekiel said. "The ceremony was disrupted. People have left. The pastor—" "Can be replaced," David said, stepping forward. "My cousin Mark is an ordained minister. He's been at the reception venue waiting for news. He can be here in 20 minutes. Jessica nodded enthusiastically. "And the guests who matter, the ones who really love you, they're all still here. They're waiting in the cathedral, hoping this can be salvaged." "But the atmosphere," Cherry said, "the joy, the celebration." "Will be there," Emma said firmly, "because love creates its own joy. Because when two people choose each other in the face of adversity, in the face of prejudice, in the face of death itself, that's not just a wedding, that's a declaration of war against everything that tries to keep love from flourishing." Cherry felt her heart swelling with a mixture of grief and hope. This was what she had fallen in love with about Ezekiel's family, this fierce loyalty, this refusal to let circumstances dictate their happiness. "What about you?" she asked Emma. "If we do this, if we get married today, you'll be—" "I'll be there," Emma said, holding up the phone. "I'll be your maid of honor via video call. I'll be watching when you kiss, when you say I do, when you become my sister officially and forever." Ezekiel looked at Cherry, his eyes searching her face. "What do you think? Can we do this? Can we choose love even when everything else is falling apart?" Cherry thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, the prejudice they had faced, the assumptions people had made, the obstacles they had overcome. She thought about Emma, fighting for their happiness, even as she fought for her life. She thought about the love that had brought them together, the love that had sustained them through every challenge. "Yes," she said firmly. "Yes, we can do this. We choose love. We choose each other. We choose to get married today with Emma as our witness, with our real family surrounding us, with the truth finally out in the open." Emma's smile was radiant, transforming her pale face into something beautiful and triumphant. "Then let's have a wedding." The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. David called his cousin Mark, who arrived within minutes, still in his casual clothes, but carrying his minister's license and a heart full of love for the couple he had watched fall in love with over the years. Jessica and the other bridesmaids worked to gather the guests who had remained, the ones who really mattered. Cherry's family was there, united in their support. Ezekiel's parents, Robert and Margaret, had stayed as well, their faces showing both sorrow for Emma and fierce determination that their son's wedding would happen. The cathedral was smaller now, more intimate, filled only with people who understood that love was worth fighting for. The flowers remained beautiful, the candles still flickered with hope, and the stained glass windows cast their colorful light across the space like a blessing. Cherry had repaired her makeup and fluffed her dress, but she wore the dirt stains and tear streaks like badges of honor. This was what real love looked like, not perfect, not untouched by pain, but stronger for having been tested.
Ezekiel stood at the altar with his phone propped up so Emma could see everything. His sister's face was pale and drawn, but her eyes were bright with joy and determination. She had insisted on doing her own makeup for the video call, wanting to look her best for her brother's wedding. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark said, his voice carrying across the cathedral with warmth and authority,
We are gathered here today to witness something extraordinary. Not just the union of two people in love, but the triumph of love over prejudice, of truth over assumption, of hope over despair. He gestured to the phone screen where Emma was watching. We are joined today by Emma Willis, who is with us in spirit and in love, reminding us that family is not just about being present in body, but about being present in heart. The congregation murmured their understanding, their hearts full of compassion for the dying woman who had fought so hard for her brother's happiness. Cherry and Ezekiel, Mark said, his voice carrying across the cathedral with warmth and authority. We are gathered here today to witness something extraordinary, not just the union of two people in love, but the triumph of love over prejudice, of truth over assumption, of hope over despair. He gestured to the phone screen where Emma was watching. We are joined today by Emma Willis, who is with us in spirit and in love, reminding us that family is not just about being present in body, but about being present in heart. The congregation murmured their understanding, their hearts full of compassion for the dying woman who had fought so hard for her brother's happiness. Cherry and Ezekiel, Mark continued, you have already been tested in ways that most couples never face. You have been challenged by prejudice, by misunderstanding, by the weight of circumstances beyond your control. And you have chosen each other anyway. You have chosen love anyway. Cherry felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy now, tears of triumph. She looked at Ezekiel, saw the love and determination in his eyes, and knew that they could face anything together. Emma, Mark said, addressing the phone screen directly, would you like to say something to your brother and his bride? Emma's voice came through the speaker, weak but clear. I want to say that I have never been prouder of my brother than I am today. Not when he made his first million, not when he built his company, not when he appeared on magazine covers. I am proud of him today because he chose love over fear, because he chose truth over comfort, because he chose to stand up for what's right even when the world was against him. She paused, gathering strength. And Cherry, I want to say that I couldn't have chosen a better sister-in-law if I had designed her myself. You are strong, you are beautiful, you are kind, and you love my brother the way he deserves to be loved. Take care of him for me. The cathedral fell silent except for the sound of people quietly crying, moved by the power of Emma's words, by the love that transcended distance and death itself. Now, Mark said, his voice strong and clear, let's have a wedding. The cathedral had been transformed by truth and love. Gone was the sterile formality of the morning ceremony. In its place was something raw, authentic, and infinitely more beautiful. The remaining guests sat closer together, united by the knowledge that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Not just the union of two people in love, but the triumph of love over prejudice, of truth over assumption, of hope over despair. Cherry stood facing Ezekiel at the altar, her hands steady in his now, her eyes clear and bright with purpose. The phone, displaying Emma's pale but radiant face, was propped on a stand between them, making her a true participant in the ceremony rather than just an observer. Ezekiel, Mark said, his voice carrying the weight of the moment, please share your vows with Cherry. Ezekiel took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving Cherry's face. Cherry, today I thought I was going to marry you in a perfect ceremony with perfect words and perfect circumstances. But I realize now that perfection isn't about having everything go according to plan. Perfection is about choosing love even when the world tries to tear it down. His voice grew stronger as he continued. I promise to love you not just in the good times, but especially in the hard times. I promise to be honest with you, even when the truth is painful. I promise to fight for us, to stand by you, to choose you every day for the rest of my life." He glanced at the phone screen where Emma was watching, tears streaming down her face. "I promise to love you the way my sister taught me to love, fiercely, completely, without reservation. I promise to be the man you deserve to be, the man she always believed I could be." Cherry's voice was clear and strong as she responded. "Ezekiel, today I learned that love isn't about the absence of storms. It's about dancing in the rain together. It's about choosing each other even when others doubt us, even when circumstances try to tear us apart." She looked at Emma through the phone screen. "Your sister taught me that love fights for what matters. So I promise to fight for us, to believe in us, to stand by you through every challenge that comes our way." Turning back to Ezekiel, she continued, "I promise to love you not despite your complexities, but because of them. I promise to be your partner in joy and sorrow, your companion in adventure and difficulty. I promise to choose you today and every day until my last breath." "The rings," Mark announced, and David stepped forward with the platinum bands that had been abandoned earlier in the chaos. As they slipped the rings onto each other's fingers, Emma's voice came through the phone speaker, weak but filled with joy. "I now pronounce you husband and wife in the eyes of God, in the eyes of love, and in the eyes of everyone who believes that love conquers all." Mark smiled at the interruption. "I couldn't have said it better myself. Ezekiel, you may kiss your bride." The kiss was tender, passionate, and filled with all the emotion of the day, the pain, the joy, the triumph, the love that had survived every test. The small congregation erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the cathedral like a hymn of victory. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mark announced, "I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Ezekiel Willis." As the newlyweds embraced, still glowing with the joy of their union, Emma's voice came through the phone speaker, calling for their attention. "Come here, you two," she said, her voice noticeably weaker than it had been just minutes before. "I have something for you." Cherry and Ezekiel gathered around the phone, their faces close to the screen so Emma could see them both clearly. "I wrote something for you," Emma said, her breathing becoming more labored. "I wanted to give you a wedding gift that would last forever." She held up a piece of paper, her hands shaking slightly. "I wrote this last night, when I knew I might not make it to see you married. I wanted to give you the words to carry with you always." Her voice grew stronger as she began to read. "Love is not the absence of storms, but the promise to dance in the rain together. Love is not the absence of tears, but the commitment to wipe them away. Love is not the absence of obstacles, but the determination to overcome them hand in hand." She paused, gathering strength. "Cherry and Ezekiel, your love has been tested by fire today, and it has emerged pure and true. You have shown that love sees no color, knows no prejudice, accepts no limits. You have shown that love is the strongest force in the universe."
Her voice began to fade, but she continued, "Promise me that when the world tries to divide you, you'll remember today. Promise me that when people doubt your love, you'll remember that it was strong enough to overcome death itself. Promise me that you'll live with the kind of love that changes the world." "We promise," Cherry and Ezekiel said in unison, their tears falling freely. Emma smiled, her face peaceful and radiant. "Then my work here is done. I got to see my brother marry the woman of his dreams. I got to see love win. I got to see the beginning of a story that will inspire others for generations to come." She paused, her breathing becoming more shallow. "I love you both so much. Take care of each other. Be happy. Live the life I won't get to live." The phone screen went dark for a moment. Then Emma's doctor appeared, his face grave but kind. "I'm sorry," he said gently. "She's gone." She passed peacefully, with a smile on her face, right after she finished speaking to you. The cathedral fell silent as the reality of Emma's passing settled over the gathering. Cherry and Ezekiel held each other tightly, their hearts breaking even as they celebrated their union. The juxtaposition of life and death, of joy and sorrow, of beginning and ending, was almost too much to bear. But then, from the back of the cathedral, came the sound of applause. Slow, steady, respectful applause that grew as others joined in. The guests were not applauding the tragedy of Emma's death, but celebrating the triumph of her life, the courage she had shown, the love she had defended. "She did it," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "She held on long enough to see you married. She held on long enough to give you her blessing." Margaret Willis, who had been quietly crying in the front row, stood up and approached the altar. "Cherry, my dear," she said, her voice warm with acceptance and love, "I owe you an apology. I let my fears and prejudices cloud my judgment. But watching you both today, seeing the love you share, I realize that Emma was right. Love doesn't see color or class or background. Love just sees love." She embraced Cherry warmly, then turned to her son. "Your sister would be so proud of you both. She would be proud of the man you've become, the woman you've chosen to spend your life with." Robert Willis joined his wife, his own eyes red with unshed tears. "Emma always said you two were meant to be together. She always said your love was something special. I'm sorry it took tragedy to open our eyes to what she saw all along." One by one, the guests approached the couple, offering their condolences for Emma's passing and their congratulations for the wedding. The cathedral became a place of healing, where barriers broke down and hearts opened up. But there was one notable absence. Pastor Williams had disappeared entirely, leaving behind only the memory of his prejudice and the damage he had tried to inflict. "He's gone," Jessica reported to the group. "Packed up his things and left. Word is he's requested a transfer to another parish." "Good," Jerome Matthews said firmly. "A man who spreads poison in the name of God has no place in a house of worship." "No," Cherry said gently. "Don't let bitterness take root. Emma wouldn't want that. She'd want us to forgive him, to hope that someday he'll learn to see love where he once saw only prejudice." Her words hung in the air like a benediction, a reminder that love's greatest power lies not in victory over others, but in the transformation of hearts. The reception that followed was unlike any wedding celebration in the cathedral's history. Instead of a formal dinner with speeches and dancing, it became an intimate gathering of people sharing stories, offering comfort, and celebrating the complex beauty of life. Cherry had changed out of her wedding dress into a simple but elegant black dress that honored both her new marriage and Emma's memory. Ezekiel wore a black suit, his wedding ring catching the light as he moved through the crowd, accepting condolences and congratulations with equal grace. The cake, a towering confection of white chocolate and roses, stood untouched for most of the evening. Instead, people gathered around tables laden with comfort food brought by family and friends, sharing memories of Emma and stories of love conquering adversity. "I want to tell you something," Diane Matthews said, approaching her new son-in-law with tears in her eyes. "Emma called me last week. She wanted to make sure I knew how much you loved my daughter. She said you talked about Cherry like she was the sun and moon and stars all rolled into one." Ezekiel's breath caught. "She did? She did. She said she had never seen her brother so happy, so complete. She said Cherry brought out the best in you, made you want to be a better man. That girl loved you both so much. She fought to stay alive long enough to see you happy." As the evening progressed, the gathering took on an almost mystical quality. People shared stories of Emma's courage, her humor, her fierce loyalty to her family. They talked about the lessons she had taught them about love, about fighting for what matters, about choosing joy even in the face of suffering. "She made me promise to tell you something," David said, approaching the couple as the evening wound down. "She said to tell you that every time you doubt your love, every time someone tries to make you feel like you don't belong together, remember that love is not about fitting in, it's about standing out, being brave enough to be different, to be real, to be true." Cherry and Ezekiel exchanged a look of profound understanding. They had been through fire together, had faced the worst that prejudice and assumption could throw at them, and had emerged stronger than ever. 6 months later, Cherry and Ezekiel stood in the rose garden behind their new home, a beautiful estate that perfectly blended their two worlds. The garden was Emma's idea. She had insisted that they create a space where love could grow and flourish, where they could remember her every day. In the center of the garden stood a marble bench with a plaque that read, "Emma Willis, sister, fighter, believer in love. She taught us that love conquers all." "I got a letter today," Ezekiel said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. Cherry looked up from the roses she was tending, her eyebrows raised in surprise. "What did he say?" "He's in therapy," Ezekiel said, unfolding the letter. "He's working to understand his prejudices, to confront the assumptions he's carried his whole life. He said watching Emma fight for our love, seeing the damage his prejudice caused, made him realize he needed to change."
He read from the letter, "I cannot undo the harm I caused on your wedding day, but I can ensure that I never cause such harm again. I am learning that love is indeed colorblind, that the heart sees what the eyes sometimes cannot. I pray that you will find it in your hearts to forgive an old fool who let fear masquerade as righteousness." Cherry was quiet for a long moment, her hands still among the roses. "What do you think?" "I think Emma would want us to forgive him," Ezekiel said. "I think she'd want us to hope that he becomes better, that he learns to see love where he once saw only prejudice." Cherry nodded, her heart full of the wisdom her sister-in-law had shared. "Then we forgive him, not for his sake, but for ours, not because he deserves it, but because love requires it." They stood together in the garden, surrounded by the beauty they had created, the love they had nurtured, the life they had built together. The roses bloomed around them, their petals soft and fragrant, a reminder that beautiful things can grow from the darkest soil. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Pastor Williams hadn't stopped our wedding?" Cherry asked. Ezekiel considered the question. "I think we would have gotten married with secrets between us. I think we would have started our marriage with me carrying the pain of Emma's death alone. I think we would have been happy, but not as strong as we are now." "So you're grateful for what happened?" "I'm grateful for the truth. I'm grateful that we learned we could survive anything together. I'm grateful that Emma got to see us choose each other despite the obstacles. I'm grateful that our love story became something that could inspire others." As if summoned by their conversation, a young couple approached the garden gate. They were clearly nervous, holding hands tightly, their faces showing the strain of people who had been fighting battles of their own. "Excuse me," the young man said, his voice hesitant. "Are you the Willises, the couple who got married at St. Catherine's Cathedral?" Cherry and Ezekiel exchanged a look. Their story had become something of a legend in the city, shared in social media posts and whispered conversations, a testament to the power of love to overcome prejudice. "Yes," Cherry said gently, "we are." "We heard about your wedding," the young woman said, her voice barely above a whisper, "about how you fought for each other, how you chose love even when everyone was against you. We're facing some of the same challenges. Our families don't approve of our relationship. They think we're too different, that we don't belong together."
Cherry felt her heart swell with understanding. "What are your names?" "I'm Marcus. This is Sarah. We've been together for 3 years, but our families, they just can't accept it." "Come in," Ezekiel said, opening the garden gate. "Sit with us. Let us tell you about Emma, about love, about the courage it takes to choose each other when the world is watching." As the young couple settled onto Emma's bench, Cherry and Ezekiel began to share their story. They talked about the prejudice they had faced, the assumptions people had made, the way love had given them strength to overcome every obstacle. The most important thing Emma taught us is that love is not about fitting in. It's about standing out, being brave enough to be different, to be real, to be true. "But what if we lose our families?" Sarah asked, tears in her eyes. "Then you build a new family," Ezekiel said gently. "A family of people who choose love over fear, who choose acceptance over prejudice. A family that sees hearts instead of skin color, souls instead of social status." As the sun set over the garden, painting the roses in shades of gold and crimson, the four of them sat together in the space that Emma had envisioned. They talked about love and courage, about the battles worth fighting and the hearts worth healing. "Do you think she can see us?" Cherry asked, looking up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "I think she sees every couple who chooses love over fear. I think she sees every person who stands up to prejudice, who refuses to let others dictate their happiness. I think love is winning, one heart at a time." And in the garden that love had built, surrounded by the roses that bloomed in defiance of the darkness, 4 people sat together and proved that Emma Williams had been right all along. Love conquers all. Cherry and Ezekiel's love story reminds us that true love isn't about perfect circumstances. It's about choosing each other through every storm. Their journey from a wedding interrupted by prejudice to a love that now inspires others shows us that sometimes our greatest challenges become our greatest triumphs. What obstacles have you overcome in the name of love? How has your own love story inspired others? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because every love story has the power to change the world. Epilogue. 5 years later, the Willis Foundation for Love and Acceptance had helped over 10,000 couples overcome prejudice and build lasting relationships. The foundation's headquarters featured a rose garden identical to the one behind Cherry and Ezekiel's home, with Emma's bench at its center. Pastor Williams, now retired and having completed extensive diversity training, served as a volunteer counselor for interfaith and interracial couples. His transformation from a man who spread prejudice to one who fought against it became a powerful testament to the possibility of change. And in the cathedral where their story began, a new plaque hung near the altar, in memory of Emma Williams, who taught us that love sees no color, knows no prejudice, and accepts no limits. May all who enter here choose love over fear. The love that had triumphed over prejudice, that had chosen joy in the face of sorrow, that had built bridges where others had tried to build walls, continued to grow and flourish, touching lives and changing hearts, one story at a time. Love had indeed conquered all.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.